So welcome back to my channel. This is Dom and another one of my occasional series on castles of the Welsh Marcher region. So this was inspired by this book that I found. This is Castles on the Marches by John Kinross, and it's a very simple book that just lists out about 120 of the castles still in existence, and those that there's basically just a bit of a wall left, that cover the historic Welsh and English Marcher region, the borderlands basically between Wales and England. And we, my wife and I, spend a lot of time up in Shropshire, which is right in the middle of that area, and we like going to visit historical sites. I love my castles, and she puts up with them. So it's a good mixture, and we've been working our way through this book. And this is what this series is about, showing you what I find, a little bit of history. So it's more on the history side rather than the gaming side. So if you're interested, check out the other ones in this series. And not every one of them is in this book. There's a few castles we found that aren't actually in this book. I'm not sure why, because most of them date from the Norman period. That's when the Marcher period really started. It was an attempt by William I, William the Bastard, William of Normandy, to control the unruly Welsh, and he set some of his most important and warlike magnates up in the border regions and basically let them be sort of mini kings in their own rights and built their own castles. And that's where the Marcher region comes from, and that's where these castles basically have their foundations in. Anyway, enough of my chatter. If you're interested, look on. Anyway, enough of my chatter. If you're interested, there's another one coming along right now. So next up, I'm going to look at the amazingly impressive Raglan Castle. This is unfortunately another one that doesn't feature in the book itself, but is one of the most amazing castles you will see. It's located just north of the village of Raglan in the county of Monmouthshire in southeast Wales. And the castle you see today, which is just one of those fairy tale ones that just, you know, every time you think of a castle, this is the sort of one that comes to mind. It isn't actually very old. Well, it is, but it's not. It dates back to the 15th and 17th century. But that said, it's believed that there was, and very likely that there was, an earlier Motte and Bailey castle built on the site, or somewhere near the site, around the time of the Norman invasion of Wales. Because we know that the village of Raglan was granted to William Fitz-Osbert, the Earl of Herefordshire, and archaeologists suspect an early Motte and Bailey castle may have been built on the site during that period, and would seem perfectly logical given the strategic location that Raglan has and the importance of the area. The local manor was held by the Blewett family from the late 12th century until the late 14th century, and the family built a manor house somewhere on the same site during the period, surrounded by parks. But by the late medieval period, Raglan site was surrounded by large deer parks of Home Park and Red Deer Park. The latter one, Red Deer Park, was actually enclosed. The current Raglan castle that you see today was built by William ap Thomas, a lesser son of a minor Welsh family who rose through the ranks of the mid-15th century politics, profiting from local offices that he held. William married first Elizabeth, a wealthy heiress, and then Gladfus, another heiress who proved to be a powerful regional figure in her own right. And in 1432, Sir William purchased the manor of Raglan, where he'd already been staying as a tenant, for 1,000 marks, and commenced a period of building work that established the basic shape of the castle that you can see today. although most of it, with the exception of the south gate and the Great Tower, was later built over. Sir William's son dropped the Welsh version of his name, calling himself William Herbert, and he continued to rise in dominance, supporting the House of York during the War of the Roses and fighting in the 100 Years' War in France, while making his fortune from the Gascon wine trade. He was more closely associated with Welsh politics and status, and he was the first Welshman to be made an earl, and described by contemporary poets as the national deliverer who might achieve Welsh independence. Indeed, in 1460s, William used his increasing wealth to remodel Raglan on a much grander scale as befitted his sort of status. The symbolism of the architecture may have reflected Welsh family roots. One historian, Matthew Johnson, suggests that the polygon towers were possibly designed to imitate those of Carmarthen Castle, whose architecture carries numerous allusions to the eventual return of the Roman Empire to Wales. Another historian, Anthony Emery, has described the resulting castle of Raglan as one of the most formidable displays of medieval defensive architecture. And it is one of those, as I said before, it's one of those absolutely amazing castles. It's a ruin these days, but it's not hard to imagine how impressive it would have been in its day as a full castle, as with roofs and what have you. William Herbert was executed as a Yorkish supporter in 1469 after the Battle of Edgecote Moor. So building work on Raglan Castle stopped for a period under his son, also called William Herbert, before recommencing in the late 1470s. By 1492, the castle had passed to Elizabeth Somerset, William Herbert's daughter, who married Sir Charles Somerset, passing the castle into the new family line. Sir Charles was politically successful both under Henry VII and Henry VIII, which is quite an achievement to survive, being made Earl of Worcester. His son, Henry Somerset, died shortly after inheriting Raglan, but not before using lead reclaimed from Tinnerton Abbey to help rebuild the castle during the dissolution of the monasteries. His son and grandson, William Somerset and Edward Somerset, respectively, proved to be what John Kenton described as wealthy, brilliant and cultured men. William rebuilt much of the pitched stone court, including the hall, adding a long gallery and developing the gardens into a new Renaissance style. Indeed, the Somerset family owned two key castles of the region, Raglan itself and also Chepstow, which isn't that far away. In the 17th century, Edward Somerset made improvements to the interior, but focused primarily on the exterior, expanding and developing the gardens and building the moat walk around the Great Tower. The resulting gardens were considered as the equal of anything in the kingdom of the time. When he inherited the castle of Raglan in 1628, Henry Somerset, then the 5th Earl of Worcester, continued to live a grand lifestyle in the castle, and in 1630s, with a host of staff including a steward, master of horse, master of fish ponds, surveyors, auditors, ushers, falconer, and many footmen. The interior walls were hung with rich tapestry from Arras in France, while an inventory taken in 1639 recorded a large number of silver and gilt plate kept in the Great Tower, including an ostrich egg cup, a silver basket for oranges and lemons, then all extremely luxurious items in Wales. Mead was a popular drink, but contemporaries described the castle as being a particularly sober and respectful community. #boring. Henry developed the entrance route to the castle, including building the Red Gate. His son Edward, Lord Herbert, became famous for building a water-commanding machine in the Great Tower, which used steam to pump a huge fount of water high into the air from the moat. In August 1642, the First English Civil War began between the Royalist supporters of Charles and Parliament, and Raglan was held by Henry, then an elderly man, supported by his son, Lord Herbert. Both men were firm Royalists. Indeed, King Charles sent his own son, Prince Charles, on a fundraising tour of the region, starting in Raglan Castle in October 1642. Following which Henry was promoted to the first Marquis of Worcester. However, tensions grew in the region, particularly because of religious tensions between more Protestant local people and the Catholic Marquis. On one of those occasions, a local group attempted to search the castle, but were reported to be driven away by the sudden noise of Sir Herbert's steam engine. The defences of Raglan were improved after this, with a modern earth bastion built around the castle and a powder mill created, and a garrison of around 300 men was established, costing an amazing £40,000 in those days. Heavy cannons were also installed in the bastion, and light pieces were placed in the towers. Lord Herbert left the castle to join the campaign against Parliament, returning at intervals to acquire more funds for the war, and Charles I visited the castle twice, first in June 1645 after the Battle of Naseby, and then again in 1646 when he enjoyed playing bowls on the castle's green. The Royalist cause was now in real trouble, and the Marquis, preparing for the worst, started to send valuables, including the oak panelling from the parlour, some plaster ceilings and many pictures, to his brother at the nearby Troy house for safekeeping. Lord Herbert, his son, was captured in Ireland, and an attack on Raglan itself appeared imminent. In readiness for a possible siege, the castle garrison was increased from 400 to 800 soldiers. An avenue of trees outside the castle gates were cut down and neighbouring buildings destroyed to prevent their use by the parliamentarian forces. Large amounts of food were brought in to support the community, which had basically attracted a lot of other prominent Royalist leaders from the area who were sheltering in the castle. The first parliamentarian army arrived in early June under the command of Colonel Morgan and Sir Trevor Williams, and after several calls for the castle to surrender, which failed, a siege ensued, lasting the summer months. And in August, additional forces under General Fairfax himself arrived, and again calls for the castle were renewed. Fairfax's men began digging trenches towards the castle, and used these to move mortars forward, probably including the famous Roaring Meg, bringing the interior of the castle into artillery ranges. Facing a hopeless situation, the Marquis finally surrendered the castle on the 19th of August, and relatively generous terms for the garrison. The Marquis himself was arrested and sent to Windsor Castle, where he died shortly afterwards. Informed shortly before his death that Parliament had granted his request to be buried at the family vault in Windsor, the Marquis replied, "Why then, I shall have a better castle when I'm dead than they took from me when I was alive." Fairfax destroyed the castle, be totally destroyed under the supervision of Henry Herbert, a descendant of William ap Thomas. Funny how history has a way of coming back round. But the fortification proved so strong that only some of the walls are destroyed or slighted. Historian Matthew Johnson describes the event of the slighting of the castle as having an atmosphere of a community festival, as local people dredged the castle moat in search of treasures and emptied the fish pond of valuable carp. The castle library, including important collection of Welsh documents and books, was either stolen or destroyed at the same time. Despite some immediate confiscation after the siege, by the time of the restoration of Charles II, the Somerset family had managed to recover most of their possessions, including Raglan Castle itself. Henry Somerset III, Marquis, decided to prioritise rebuilding some of his other properties at Troy and Badminton rather than Raglan. For the first half of the 18th century, the castle continued to deteriorate, with the Somerset family allowing their stewards to quarry stone from the castle for the repair of other estate buildings. But this was finally put to an end. This practice was finally put to an end in 1756. And the castle, Raglan Castle, started to become a tourist attraction, part of the popular Rye tour. Seats, fences and bridges were installed, and the first guidebook to the site was published in the early 19th century. The Great Hall was temporarily re-roofed in the 1820s when the castle was used for grand entertainment by Somersets, and in 1830 the Great Staircase was also reinstated. The Monmouthshire antiquarian Joseph Bradley recorded a visit to the castle by Edward VI and Queen Alexandra, and then the Prince and Princess of Wales in October 1881. By 1936, Henry Somerset, the 10th Duke, entrusted the guardianship of Raglan Castle to the Commission of Works, and the castle became a permanent tourist attraction. Today, it's classed as a Grade 1 listed building and a scheduled monument, and is administered by the Welsh equivalent of Welsh Heritage, basically. Between 2003 and 2007, there's been excavations of the castle in advance of a new visitor centre that was built. The castle itself was built, obviously, in several phases. Most of the initial work was done in 1420s and 1430s, as I said, with a major reconstruction in 1460s. One of the most striking features of Raglan Castle, if you go visiting, is the Great Tower, sometimes called the Yellow Tower of Gwent, which sits outside the rest of the castle, protected by a moat and linked to the fountain court by a bridge. Unfortunately, when we were there, we couldn't get into the Great Castle. There was some kind of event being set up in there, which was a shame because I would love to have seen it, but it's nonetheless very impressive from the outside. The tower itself represents the sort of trends of the 15th and 17th century British castle making, with tower keeps as large as solid buildings designed for private accommodation. Probably inspired by the sort of thing that France was doing. The Grand Tower was probably, a Great Tower was probably begun in the 1430s and 1440s, probably on the moat of the previous castle. The tower today has lost not only one of its walls, but part of the upper structure, so it would originally have been 3 stories high, with additional crinolines at the top, similar to the gatehouse. It was designed to be a self-contained fortification with its own water supply and food supplies, and luxurious accommodation lit by large windows on the upper floor. Originally, the tower was reached by a drawbridge. This drawbridge was designed to have 2 parts: a wide, heavy bridge that could be raised or lowered when the family was in residence, and a thinner bridge, easier to lift, designed for the servants to use in other times. The Herberts used the bridge as their badge, and it can be seen in the carved window designs on the castle. The drawbridge was replaced by a grander stone bridge in the 1460s, probably at the cost of around £900 to £1,000. An apron wall with 6 towers was also added around the tower around about the same time. The original moat around the tower would have been a simple design, but was redesigned in the 1460s to provide a walkway around the outside of the Grand Tower. The niches in the walls of the walkway are of the 17th century origin, and originally would have held classical statues, in such a way that the walkway would have provided a dignified way of admiring the Great Tower, and it's very likely that fish would have been bred in the moat. So there you go, Raglan Castle. If you are ever in the area of Monmouth, it's well worth a visit. It really is a spectacular castle, and as you can tell from the history, steeped in both Welsh and English history. Not so much part of the Marcher territories, although, as we say, there's definitely would have been a castle there in the Marcher period, but very, very heavily tied up in the events of the English Civil War, that's for sure. And as I say, just one of those castles that you just go, wow, this is what you think of when you think of a castle. And even though it's a ruin, it's still got a lot of its charm despite that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like and share, and I'll come back with another castle very, very soon.